Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mikhail Skala, International Labor Organization, Social Protection Department in the Occupied Palestinian Territories. Welcome to this fifth session in the series of webinars entitled The Arab Social Protection, organized by the ILO in collaboration with ISA. The series of webinars is going to provide a space for dialogue and conversations between the Arab practitioners and the international practitioners in the sector of Arab protection, in the sector of social protection in the Arab region. So this initiative sheds light on reforms and the programs in the different Arab states. And this provides as well deep perspective into the different steps towards integrating the different social protection systems that are based on human rights in the Arab regions. Today, the working languages are going to be Arabic and English. So I'm going to move now to English, just to brief you on the current session that is going to deal with the different challenges, reforms, and outcomes related to the social protection sector in the occupied Palestinian territories.
Let me just start by saying that decades of protracted crisis have largely affected and eventually shaped, we may say, the current social protection landscape in the occupied Palestinian territories. On one hand, governmental and non-governmental social assistance programs, originally thought as short-term and time-bounded programs, have become permanent structures, providing so-called routine social safety nets to a relatively stable number of beneficiaries over an extended period. On the other hand, the development of contributory social insurance scheme is limited to public sector employees, which leaves the occupied Palestinian territories as the only country among the Arab states without social security mechanisms covering private sector workers. As a result, social assistance programs dominate the scene in the occupied Palestinian territories social protection sector. However, and I would like to stress that the heavy reliance on social assistance programs does not constitute a Palestinian exception. Well, on the contrary, this is the case in many Arab countries where social insurance schemes remain limited and fragmented. In the region, time-bounded and routine safety nets, which are typically designed to serve the most impoverished, are implemented in environments where both income and multidimensional poverty are highly dynamic, driven by sudden internal or external shocks, such as economic downturns, conflicts, or large-scale displacement. Despite the ongoing efforts, the region's social protection coverage remains limited. To give some figures, only 30% of the population in the Arab states is currently covered by at least one cash benefit, which positions the region as the second least covered globally, just ahead of Africa. In this context, social assistance programs then account for about half of the social protection coverage at the regional level, making of social assistance a striking feature of social protection mechanisms regionally. From that perspective, coordination efforts and reforms currently in the making in the Palestinian context can offer interesting perspective on how to build integrated social protection systems on a step-by-step fashion amidst and despite multiple crises. In occupied Palestinian territories, the impact of long-standing crisis compounded by cycles of violence and their severe humanitarian repercussions have repeatedly blurred the lines between humanitarian and development interventions, making a strong case for enhanced and effective coordination among humanitarian, development, and national actors. Recognizing that interconnectedness and that embeddedness of humanitarian development and peace challenges has been key in OPT to draft a pathway towards integrated strategies able to address immediate needs while promoting long-term stability and resilience, specifically through the gradual establishment of social protection floors. Starting 2022, the establishment of a social protection, cash and voucher assistance coordination mechanism across the humanitarian development and peace nexus has allowed for enhanced coordination across humanitarian and development interventions, providing an exchange platform able to link different elements of the Palestinian social protection puzzle without losing sight of the bigger picture. These are, of course, fragile developments, and the journey towards the establishment of an integrated protection system is still at its inception. However, it is important to notice that it is precisely amidst, and again, despite multiple challenges, that gradual but still profoundly significant achievements are making their way through. Let me quote just two of them. Firstly, the establishment of a coordination mechanism across the nexus in the social protection sector has already allowed for increased data sharing capacity amongst humanitarian development and national partners, and coordination and harmonization amongst significant social assistance programs are currently under discussion. Secondly, it is precisely in 2024, which is in the middle of the current conflict, that the Ministry of Social Development rolled out the first ever rights-based social allowances for persons with severe disability and older persons in occupied Palestinian territories. This is a clear switching away from poverty targeting approaches that usually dominate crisis-affected contexts, and that indeed did constitute the main component of the Ministry of Social Development National Cash Transfer Program just ahead of the current crisis. In a few words, the building blocks of social protection floors are being crafted, although the unfolding tragic circumstances in occupied Palestinian territories, Lebanon, and in the region pose a threat to the hard-won gains. The journey is ongoing and multiple outstanding challenges remain. It is this journey that will be the focus of the upcoming panel, which will reflect on its numerous challenges as well as its gradual yet profoundly significant achievements. Next slide, please. I will now pass over to our colleague and today's moderator, Farah Ashami, with a long-standing experience in the sector and who coordinates the social protection file for the Arab Reform Initiative, to introduce the panelists and guide you through this webinar from now on. Farah, the floor is yours. Thank you and enjoy the session.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be among you today. I think we can go to the next slide so that we can brief our dear participants about some housekeeping information that might be useful. First of all, kindly note that this session is being recorded, and this whole presentation that you will be seeing today will be posted later on the socialprotection.org's website and will be sent to all registrants after the session. You can use for sure the closed captions feature. So it's like, as you know, it's the Zoom AI generated automatic captions. You just need to click on the CC button where you see it. A simultaneous interpretation from Arabic to English and from English to Arabic is available. Just click please on the interpretation icon and choose the room where you would like to be listening to us, or through which you'd like to hear us. Next slide, please. So a few additional housekeeping information. You can leave your messages either in the chat box or in the Q&A. In the Q&A section, please leave your questions to the panelists. And in the chat box, you can present yourself and you can provide some comments. Either way, if you use the chat box or the Q&A section, please make sure to introduce yourself before. And please do interact with us on social media. We are on X, also known as Twitter. Please interact with us, share, disseminate the event. The discussion will be going for the next hour or so, and we'd like to have more people with us and more people know of the outcomes and takeaways of our discussion as well. So as you can see, there is a very brief outline of the rest of today's session. We will have a small introduction followed by a presentation and a discussion with the panelists, and then there will be a Q&A session. It's like an open discussion with the audience present with us today, and we really encourage you to send your comments and questions so that we can address them, and then we'll have some closing remarks before we can close today's session and wrap up. Next, please. Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today. I'm going to begin by introducing them in chronological order, the order in which they would come in and speak. First, we have Mr. Mu'min Badarna. He's the National Social Protection Coordinator at the ILO. Ms. Manar Ramadan, unfortunately, had to apologize because she is facing an emergency and cannot be with us today. So we are sorry about that, but she's the Director General of Planning and Aid Management at the Ministry of Social Development. Mr. Bilal Fallah is the Associate Professor of Economics at the Palestine Polytechnic University. Mr. Luca Sangali is the National Cash Working Group Coordinator. And Cosma Gabaglio is the Social Policy Officer at UNICEF Palestine. Last but not least, Mr. Majid Fathallah is the Regional Coordinator of the ISSA. So all fellow panelists are welcome, and we can now kickstart the discussion with a presentation from Mr. Mu'min to provide us an overview of the whole status quo, of the whole situation of the social protection landscape in the OPT currently. Mu'min, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Farah, for the introduction. I will be actually presenting in Arabic. The presentation itself will be in English. So I invite you all to switch to Arabic interpretation for those who need.
Hello, everyone. I'm just sharing the presentation with all of you. Today, in this short presentation, this 20-minute presentation, we're going to have an overview on the social protection developments in the Occupied Palestinian Territory and some of the reforms and their importance in light of the new context of the crisis and the current crisis taking place in the Gaza Strip. So we will start with the historical context of the social protection and what pushes us to change and reform in social assistance, especially in light of the current circumstances. And then we're going to move to the different financial allocations for the disabled, for the elderly people, and those reforms that have been adopted by the Palestinian Authority and the Ministry of Social Development recently. Then we're going to move to the social security file in Palestine before moving to some closing remarks and some final remarks. As you know, in Palestine, well, this country is going through a lot of political and economic crises and different sorts of crises repeatedly, with a sharp financial crisis that is impeding the social protection system and its capacity to protect the people against poverty. In Palestine, there is a main program providing cash assistance within the programs of the Ministry of Social Development, and it is based on poverty targeting. And it is going to be the main content of my presentation. This program has been established in 2011, and its main target is covering 50% of the dire poverty gap for the beneficiaries. And of course, because of the different humanitarian crises and circumstances, there have been a lot of non-governmental programs providing cash assistance and in-kind assistance. However, they are partitioned kind of and intertwined with the governmental programs when it comes to the design, the targeting, and also the value of benefits and the allowances and transfers. And here comes the importance of linkage, of coordination through using the nexus methodology in order to have a complementarity in work and in order to avoid any duplication in targeting and in order to use the limited resources of the sector in the best possible way. Just a bit away of the social assistance. Let us talk about social insurance. There is also a limited coverage of the social insurance. And this is provided only for the civil servants in Palestine and the security forces. And these count for a limited percentage of 5 to 7% based on the latest report of the ILO in 2021. And so consequently, a big part of the private sector is totally absent from any social insurance covering all aspects of life, except for guarantees under the labor code that would guarantee for maternity, work injuries, and unemployment. And this is kind of end of service indemnities. And this is insufficient, and it doesn't constitute any comprehensive social protection. And it's not financially sustainable because it's not based on solidarity between the employers and the employees. Especially ever since the crisis began in October 2023 in Palestine, and specifically in the Gaza Strip, there was a necessity to reconsider the methodology and the non-traditional ways related to social protection so that they could be able to protect the people, individuals, and the households in light of the current crisis in collaboration with different partners and based on human rights-based approaches. What are the reasons pushing us towards a change and reform when it comes to social assistance sector, especially in light of the current crisis and in light of the emergency? Now we're going to present mainly the national program that I've talked about, which is poverty targeted, as well as the reforms that have been adopted by the Ministry of Social Development in partnership with the ILO and the different international partners in order to have more efficiency in protecting individuals and their families from the different dangers and risks, and in order to protect them against falling into poverty in the first place. And we're going to try as much as possible to reduce the errors of exclusion that traditional programs suffer from. And I mean by that, the poverty targeting traditional programs, be it in Lebanon, be it in Jordan, or in other countries. And so, in order to be able to include new programs limiting such problematics, it would be better to better understand the dynamic nature of poverty in order to design efficient social protection systems covering all aspects of life. And based on the different studies by ILO and other organizations, in summary, the social protection mechanisms that do only focus on targeting chronic poverty fail to achieve even its own objective, which is taking these families out of poverty. And I will be presenting to you a study prepared by the ILO in collaboration with the Central Administration of Statistics in Palestine. And this is based on the consumption and the expenditure aspects. And here, this would explain that you are using in this study some older years. So 2013, 2014, and 2018. And these surveys are issued every 5 years. However, unfortunately, until now, this year's survey has not been issued because of the war, and there have been delays because of this war. But what we're going to see here is that we can notice here that there's a distribution of the different social categories on these 5 years in Palestine. To the left of the screen, you will see how the different social categories are distributed between poor in red, marginalized in yellow, middle income in blue, high income, high middle income, and the rich are in green, and this is very limited. So to the left, you would see all the regions of Palestine, all of the occupied territories. And so this is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Right in the middle, we might see only the West Bank, and to the right, only the Gaza Strip. So here, we're going to try simply to pay attention to a fact. We can see how in the Gaza Strip to the right, between 2013 and 2018, the low middle category in blue has been reduced by 50%, and it has gone downwards towards vulnerability and poverty. And so you can see here that the levels of poverty have changed dynamically, especially in Gaza. For example, in 2013, the percentage was 34%. In 2018, it has become 56%. At a time where in the West Bank, we can see that between 2013 until 2018, the percentage of those who are in the poor category has been reduced by 6%. In the following slide, we will see how these categories would move and how that movement is going to cause a big problematic if we just use the poverty targeting mechanism. Because in fact, the poverty targeting mechanism, in light of these changes and dynamism, is going to create exclusion errors or maybe inclusion errors, which would make the program inefficient and not sufficiently efficient to target the poor at every moment of change, when they change from poor category to vulnerable categories to middle categories, etc. And now we shall move to the next slide, the one that you can see. Here we can see how the different categories and classes do change. So we're going to see the class mobility. So there you go, between 2013 and 2018. So you have these 2 points, 2013, 2018. The figure 3D to the right is about the mobility that has taken place only in the West Bank, whereas to the left, you have the class mobility in the OPT. In the left, so in Palestine in general, for the red color, so you can see that 50% from the poor in 2013 have moved upwards to become from the marginalized and the low middle category in 2018, and they are no longer poor. However, we can see a part in the same graph, a part of the low middle category in blue that have moved to vulnerability and poverty in 2018. So there's a change here. Some at the bottom have gone upwards and vice versa in different percentages. Of course, the reasons behind that are numerous. Some are related to the demographic changes, to the labor market, economic crises, political crises, health crises such as COVID. If that study was made in COVID-19, we would have seen even more changes happening. But the main objective is for us to see here that the poverty is changing, is dynamic. And this is why there should be social protection mechanisms responding to the dynamic nature of poverty. And so consequently targeting vulnerability rather than poverty. And that would be based on the life cycle methodology. And this is what we're going to talk about in the upcoming slides. So from childhood until the elderly age and during the working age. So some would tell me now that, well, we all know that the poverty is dynamic. It's not fixed. We know that the percentage of poverty sometimes is reduced during a certain year and it increases in another year. So this is only natural and doesn't need any study. But here what we're trying to show is that we're trying to link these changes to the poverty-targeted programs. The main problem with targeting poverty or programs based on targeting poverty is to reevaluate the level of poverty of the different households in a at the later stage. So in most of the programs, the timeline is every 2 years. So every 2 years we go on field visits. We make sure to update the different data and to know that whether the level of poverty has changed or not. It has gone up or down. But what happens normally, and for different reasons, is that this evaluation is not done and is not conducted every 2 years. In many cases, we would have a period of 4 to 5 years until there's a re-evaluation of the level of poverty and the vulnerability of individuals and households. So we saw today how the levels of poverty would change, not just within a period of 5 years, but they would change within a period of 1 year or within a period of 1 month. There are different shocks, such as the unemployment or the death of the caterer of the family, and many other reasons. And so here, the re-evaluation of the households, this exercise is very difficult. This is very costly and it needs huge human resources. And this is one of the reasons that would make it sometimes useless. It makes it useless to be repeated every year or every 2 years. Hence the importance of having social protection programs that are simple, transparent, clear, and easy to manage, and at the same time not costly at the administrative level, such as the traditional programs. So this is just a kind of a summary of the different points that I've raised while explaining the previous slide. So approximately 50% based on this study and based on the data that we've had. So 50% of those who have been classified as poor in 2013 are no longer poor in 2018. And this was, well, of course, we have set 2014 as an additional year because there was a war against Gaza in 2014. And this would show also that we've had a huge percentage of poverty, an increase in the percentage of poverty in Gaza in 2014. And we are trying to link that to the current crisis in the Gaza Strip. So the percentage of poverty now in Gaza is 100%. Everyone is poor.
40% of the poor households experience transient poverty, moving up and down, which makes it very difficult to target those who are extremely poor. This is where it is very important to target categories based on the life cycle schemes in social protection systems. This will be creating a social protection floor that is based on life cycle, including the elderly, including people with disabilities, as well as children, in addition to people at working age. This is how we can gradually start working on the matter. And we, in the ILO, with our partners and the Ministry of Social Development, we have adopted and included 2 new social allowances or cash allowances for the people with disabilities and older persons. Based on the studies conducted on Palestine, we have seen that these 2 categories are mostly vulnerable to risks at a higher risk compared to others. Interruption from the moderator asking the panelists to wrap up for the last 2 minutes. A moment. Farah, I thought that I had 20 minutes. Correct me if I am wrong. Farah says, please move on. I will message you later on to double check. I will send you a message on the chat. This was very important to tackle the issues resulting from poverty targeting programs, which I have briefly explained. We have seen that given the fact that the data was not updated on a regular basis, there was a need to adopt a rights-based approach that would target specific categories in order to include the biggest number possible of people that are vulnerable, that are excluded from social protection. In other terms, the main objective was to ensure that the target was protecting them from falling into poverty instead of removing them from poverty. Multiple studies have been conducted in this regard, and we have seen that the cost of removing families from poverty is much higher compared to the cost of protecting them from falling into poverty, especially if there is a comprehensive integrated social protection system that is based on social allowances. Talking more about other reasons that led to such allowances, we have said that categorical allowances are transparent, are simpler to understand, are not complicated, such as the PMT. There are not multiple changes that should be taken into consideration. They are more acceptable by beneficiaries, and they contribute to enhance social cohesion. For instance, if I am an older person, I will be eligible to receiving such an allowance, which is not the case in the PMT, where there are different changes or criteria that should be taken into consideration, and it will be difficult for people to understand what those criteria are. And usually, if you object to why you haven't received such an allowance, responding to your request will be very difficult to understand. Given the current PMT in Gaza, how would it work? How can we target those who are the most poor, since everyone is poor in Gaza? And therefore, there will be exclusion errors for those who deserve to be included but have been excluded. And that is why we need to have a comprehensive integrated social protection, which is a rights-based approach. This is the social protection floor that I have previously discussed, from childhood up until old age, including working age. It provides different benefits, social benefits, contributory schemes. We have started with the allowances for older persons and persons with severe disabilities, and gradually we hope to include more categories. Based on all of these studies conducted with the Palestinian Authority and the Ministry of Social Development, there was a request by the Ministry of Social Development to assist them in designing social allowances based on their national strategy. There was a commitment to provide comprehensive social protection that is based on life cycle guarantees. We took the conventional PMT system and we included 3 subcomponents. One is a small program targeting the poor, and the 2 larger programs are one dedicated to the older people and the second to people with disabilities. Currently, we are targeting 20,000 persons with severe disability in the West Bank that are registered in the social registry with the ministry, and there is pension and income tested. For instance, if they are receiving pension or income from another source, they will be excluded given the limited resources, and they need to have severe disability and proven disability. And here there's no age limit, and there is a transfer value of $70 monthly. As regards the elderly, we are currently targeting around 15,000 older persons above 65 years of age without disability registered in the social registry. This, in the same way, we have the pension and income test, and the transfer value is the same. In case we have an older person with disability, then they will receive the disability allowance only. This brings me to the end of the presentation. I may take 3 to 4 minutes only. The missing piece. The missing piece in the social insurance scheme, the missing piece is the social insurance scheme in the OPT. In 2016 to 2018, major efforts were made to adopt the law on social insurance for workers in the private sector. Unfortunately, there were protests against this law for multiple reasons. There were objections given the lack of trust in the authority, governance, etc. And that is why this law was suspended in 2018 by the president. However, as the ILO, working with our tripartite partners, and based on the mandate by the Ministry of Social Development, a drafting committee, a tripartite drafting committee was established, and the ILO participated in the committee to respond to those requests and to amend the law as needed. The revised draft law was finalized in October 2022, and it adopted key recommendations that responds to the requests made in 2018 in relation to governance and sustainability of the new social security system. Most importantly, amendments related to the gradual implementation of the law to encourage businesses to join in a specific time frame. Furthermore, we had additional guarantees to ensure joint decisions being taken by the government workers and the employers. Amongst the most important mechanisms adopted was the amendment in 2023, before the events of the 7th of October, there were further progress made, and still there will be additional work to be done before the final approval. However, due to the war, it has been suspended, and still social insurance still remains a main priority for the tripartite partners and the Palestinian Authority, the workers, and employers, as mentioned in the reform agenda presented by the Palestinian Prime Minister earlier this year. I would like to move now to my final remarks before I give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Bilal, who will be also commenting on social security. A few final remarks to wrap up, but of course we are ready for any questions. I would like to say first that the new crisis context requires a more transparent and inclusive social protection based on a right-based approach that is able to overcome any shortcomings in poverty targeting. We have seen the problems that are currently linked to the traditional and conventional methods. That is why it's important to expand the scope of social allowances in to include also the Gaza Strip. The national social allowances is a crucial and positive step to achieve a gradual social protection floor in Palestine. In light of the ongoing crisis, and as mentioned by my colleague Michele in his opening remarks, it's important to link the humanitarian approach to development and investing in a rights-based approach so that in future crises, given that the OPT is unfortunately subjected to multiple crises, we need to be better prepared at the level of the national social security and at the level of other partners to benefit more from the different schemes, resources, and available national capabilities so that these systems are sustainable and flexible at the same time. My final 2 points. In light of the fiscal crisis, it's important to diversify and broaden the financing for social insurance. First, by adopting social insurance to ensure solidarity and sharing of resources between workers and employers, and to limit pressure on social protection schemes that are non-contributory. Certainly, the social draft law remains pending. Once the political conditions allow, we believe that this will pave the way for more comprehensive social protection for workers in the private sector and their families. And this will also have an impact on all people in Palestine. This is the end of my presentation. The floor is yours, Farah. Thank you very much, Mu'min. I would like to apologize for interrupting you in the middle of your presentation. There was a slight misunderstanding on our side. I would like to thank you for this in-depth and valuable presentation that gave us a general overview of the commendable work you are doing in Palestine despite the challenges. You have shed light on the opportunities despite the situation, the opportunities that we can rely on. Thank you for also presenting your research and the very valuable conclusions and insights, which is a solid ground for the dialogue and discussion that we are going to start right now with the remaining panelists. It was an impressive introduction. Thank you very much. Based on Mu'min's presentation, I would like to follow up by saying that in times of war and crisis, and in light of economic, social, and different types of challenges that any country can face, not only in Palestine, social protection would be more important in such circumstances. Certainly, social protection is of utmost importance, given that it is a fundamental right. That is why efforts should be made to ensure comprehensive social protection for all. However, in these exceptional circumstances where multiple challenges arise, social insurance would become of a higher importance, and that is why our discussions today are necessary to see what are the possible roads ahead. What are the possible measures that could be taken to achieve our target? Moreover, there is an opportunity and a fertile land, let's say, based on the capacities and the different fragmented responses. Here I'm talking about humanitarian responses. We hope that these fragmented humanitarian responses become more integrated, more coordinated, that rely on social protection criteria more than what they do at the moment. Most importantly, once these efforts improve in terms of coordination and in terms of efficiency, they need to be integrated with the social protection scheme. There is this nexus between social protection systems on the one hand and the humanitarian assistance on the other. This nexus should be strengthened given its importance and its necessity to ensure one system or one scheme that would enhance the national system. Based on Mu'min's presentation, he has covered different elements showing favorable circumstances to ensure such integration and such consistency between social protection on the one hand and the humanitarian and development nexus. Certainly, this will also have an impact on peace and security. Based on this discussion, I would like to move forward with the discussions, moving to Mr. Bilal Fallah. I have previously introduced you. I did not read the bios, though, simply in the interest of time, to dedicate more time for the valuable discussions. Dr. Bilal works with the Polytechnic University in Palestine. We all agree on the importance of a rights-based approach in relation to social protection. Social allowances are an opportunity at the moment. This is a tool that we can use to achieve our targets faster. However, allow me to start with the social insurance. I would like to ask you more about the importance of social insurance in your opinion, especially in the current context, similarly to what was described by Mu'min. We need to take into consideration the opinions of the employers, the demands of the workers, and in terms of financing, also as mentioned by Mu'min, we have a major issue in terms of the taxes. The taxes in Palestine, where Israel is withdrawing the taxes, and the methodology of disbursing these taxes, as well as the impact of the war on Gaza on the remaining Palestinian territory. From this starting point, I would like to ask you more to explain the importance of social insurance in the current framework that was explained by Mu'min. The floor is yours. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this invitation. I am pleased to be part of this important meeting to discuss a topic of the utmost importance in the current time, which is social protection in times of crisis. There are no harder crises from what we are going through. I pray God that this crisis will end for our people in Palestine, in Gaza, and in Lebanon, and we hope that it will end as soon as possible. In my discussion, I will focus more on social security, which is one of the most important facets of social protection. It focuses on the labor market mainly. In Palestine, in general, we have social protection schemes. Part of them are relief or humanitarian schemes, and others are related to the labor market. And this is also based on the provisions of the Palestine labor law. To a certain extent, the labor law has failed to provide a comprehensive social protection, especially when it comes to unemployment benefits and other types of benefits. That is why creating a social security system in Palestine is a vital issue that is needed to ensure more integration and to extending the scope of coverage. Again, as I said before, especially in times of crisis. This issue is not only linked to the social security, but it is rather linked to creating an effective social security system. In other terms, we need to be very careful when it comes to moving from a social protection system that is based on the labor law to another alternative system. That is why we need to pay attention and not be careful in moving from one system to another that is insufficiently efficient and that does not achieve the required outcomes, and that will also have a negative impact at the economic and social levels. Since we are talking about reforms, it would be essential to slightly touch upon the most important challenges linked to the implementation of the social security law. I'm not sure if I should be using any slides or if I can continue as such. Have you sent the PowerPoint presentation? If so, we can easily show them on the screen. Have you shared them? I believe I have sent them, and I had a suggestion of not using them. We will be presenting the slides now, and the final decision is up to you whether you would like to use them or not. Can I share them from my side or not? So it would be easier to move. Since we are sharing, says the moderator, I suggest that you say next and we move, but if you wish, I will allow you to share at the moment. One moment. Thank you, and apologies for taking some time to handle this. Can you see my presentation? Yes, we can. All is clear. Going back to the heart of the subject, the first attempt was with law number 19 of 2016, which includes social security benefits, including different types of benefits, most importantly, occupational injury, retirement, maternity, as you can see on the slide. The benefits in red will be implemented first, and then the remaining benefits will be gradually implemented following a decision by the government. Certainly, there is also a shared percentage, 7% covered by the workers and 9% covered by employers. The cost is shared between both of them. As Mu'min said, the law was suspended following widespread civil protests. This is to say that there is a need for a dialogue. Even after reforms, there is a dialogue that is needed, and we should take into consideration the lessons learned from the past. In this framework, there was a study published in 2022 that explains more the opinions of workers and employers towards the suspended social security law. There were a few questions in this study, whether they agree or disagree, whether they had reserves on the law, or whether they completely object, or whether they haven't made up their minds yet. We can see amongst workers and employers that the biggest percentages are those who have not made up their minds yet regarding the social security law. To compare those who have agreed with those who haven't, we see that those who have not agreed on the law account to a higher percentage. So if we look at those who have agreed compared to those who haven't, we can see that the percentage of those who have not agreed was higher. The question here is, what are the reasons that led to the lack of agreement? Mu'min has mentioned some of those reasons. However, most importantly, the lack of trust in the management of this fund, the lack of trust in the Palestinian Authority, objections to certain provisions. And furthermore, there were higher risks associated with the collapse of the Palestinian Authority. Unfortunately, this final factor is increasing given the current war and the intentions of the Israeli occupation in the West Bank to crush any hopes of establishing a Palestinian state. The private sector had some requests as well, most importantly related to the gradual or compulsory subscription. The issue was related to the compulsory subscription or the compulsory contributions. They also had some points related to improving the governance of the Social Security Fund and selecting the board members in a manner that ensures no conflict of interest. The dialogue was reinstated again on the Social Security law in 2021. However, it was suspended as a result of the war on Gaza. I would like here to shed light on the problems related to the application of Social Security. Before the war, there was a draft law with some final touches that should be completed before adopting a new law. However, there were many challenges that should be taken into consideration before we can even start talking about a new law. Certainly any progress made will have to wait until the war. But first, the main challenges were the weak enforcement tools amongst enforcement agencies. Let's take the example of the labor law. There is already a weak enforcement of the labor law. And the problem here is that there is fear from moving from a weakly implemented law into another law that is also weakly implemented. This will totally destroy Social Security. Second, settlement of workers' rights, which is the end of service benefits. The previous draft law decided that this should be settled before the implementation of the new law. However, The percentage of workers receiving end of service gratuity are only 30%. Another challenge related to governance. The lack of dialogue or lack of representation of the private sector in the dialogue, especially the informal private sector. The main issue in the enforcement is actually in the informal sector. And this issue should be solved, and certain criteria should be accepted by both stakeholders. However, the most important is the absence of any legislative council. Even in case an agreement is made on the Social Security and on the amendments needed, there is fear, which was greatly mentioned in the previous dialogue before the start of the war. There is fear of reversing the agreement between the different parties by a new law adopted. So this is one of the main risks. Finally, lack of independence of the Social Security institutions from the government. This is related to the trust of citizens towards the government and the presence of the government in the Social Security institution. As regards reforming the Social Security law and agreeing on its provisions in the current circumstances. First, in light of the war on Gaza and its effects in the West Bank, it is difficult to complete any dialogue for obvious reasons. This may not be the priority at the moment for the government and for the tripartite partners. It is also difficult to reach a national consensus, even after the war, in the absence of the Legislative Council. There are many questions that we hear related to the possibility of absorbing the negative effects of the Israeli war through unemployment benefits. However, in my opinion, Social Security is not designed for a humanitarian disaster crisis and war crisis. For those who pretend that Social Security is essential during times of war, I may argue and say that this may not be completely accurate at the moment, because it will financially impact the Social Security institution and it may lead to its bankruptcy. And talking about the Israeli withdrawal of taxes, I would also like to say that this is another issue in relation to the acceptance of society of Social Security, because people are afraid, given the lack of funding, given the lack of any government income. They fear that the government may not be capable of covering the Social Security scheme. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this valuable presentation. In a very short period of time, you were able to give us this overview from the perspective of the Social Security and social insurance. Let us move now to another panelist, and I'm going to switch to English.
So I'm going to give our audience some time to also switch to their interpretation of preference. Okay, so Lucas Hangali, just to introduce you once again, you're the National Cash Working Group Coordinator in Palestine. And before we go basically to the optimal basically part of the discussion, which is the rights-based universal social security system, let's take a step back and look at the poverty-targeted programs that exist. So how does the poverty targeting fall short basically in the current context, specifically in the context of Gaza? What is it that makes this poverty targeted not able to achieve or to meet its purpose? How can it be improved? And is, for example, categorical targeting, vulnerability targeting, do these make solutions? And are these closer to the rights-based approach that we are calling for? The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
And I was muted. Thanks a lot, Farah, for the question and the introduction. And So I've been thinking about this question when you presented it, and I'm going to present more questions than answers, to be honest, on this point. I think in terms of poverty-based targeting, it was mentioned in one of the slides, especially in the context of Gaza now, I think we all agree that's pretty irrelevant. Like the entire population lives in extreme poverty. We have like 96% of the population facing acute food insecurity, 50% in phase 5 of the IPC, kind of catastrophic phase. So that does not really make sense at the moment in Gaza. I'm going to touch on the West Bank at the end of my part. So that is where probably we still have some space for that. But it's for all the reasons Momin mentioned before, like before we had that issue of the transient nature of poverty, the issue with timing when recertification and people have already moved across different categories. At that time was already probably not very effective if used alone. Now it's just useless in the context of Gaza. This leaves us with that option, like you were mentioning, on the categorical and vulnerability targeting. And while that is definitely interesting and an avenue we need to explore, is also extremely complex now, because I think as much as the question of who is poor in Gaza cannot really be answered easily, also the question of who is vulnerable in Gaza probably is not an easy one to answer, right? We used to have traditional categories for that, right? That we used before: pregnant and lactating women, people with disability, female-headed households, families with children, and so on and so forth. However, one question that we asked ourselves also in the past, right, at least in the cash working group at the beginning, right, is what's a household now, right? We moved from a situation where we had households we were supporting, with the definition of a group of people living under the same shelter and or the same roof, sharing resources, in a context where people keep moving into displacement, social structure keep being disrupted and reconstituted in different ways. People share communal areas, many families in the same shelter, the same tents, and then moving again, etc. Is it really possible to look at targeting a specific person in that? Like Momin, I think, mentioned the something around the shift, right, from a household level to a more individual one. But again, in the current context of Gaza, is that even possible? A question I have no answer for. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to ask you more questions than give you answers, right? Maybe something we need to look into is kind of new vulnerabilities, right? So the current conflict in Gaza has been bringing about things that we did not have before. One, for example, is malnutrition, right? I mean, there were pockets of that, there were cases definitely, but it was not the core problem. Food insecurity was not necessarily the core problem in Gaza, right? Markets have always been functional, probably way better than many people that are not involved in the Gaza context think about, right? But again, on these as well, how to identify those, right? How to register those, challenges in collecting info, but also challenging in capturing, things as they rapidly change. What we are seeing right recently, we had a constant decrease, for example, of commercial activity into Gaza, almost stopped. The whole, tragedy that is unfolding in the north of Gaza over these days. So massive movement of people are going to join other people which are already in a tragic situation. They're probably in a worse situation. So how do you really identify who is the most vulnerable there? I have actually no idea. But this is a question that is very, very important, specifically considering that we are all looking into, and that's at least, what we've been hearing around, a progressive decrease, like, of funding for many of these assistance. And of course, I'm coming from the humanitarian side of this, right, rather than the social protection one. So that's where my main points of references are. And so the importance of looking at who is the most vulnerable becomes even more relevant. So that categorical and vulnerability targeting becomes more relevant. Overall, I think, we said it from the very beginning, right? After the few weeks of months of this tragedy, when we realized that, this is nothing like anything we've ever seen before, right? We had to kind of a paradigm shift really of how we work, across all sectors, right? And for what is about, and for what is, social protection, cash and voucher assistance, humanitarian cash, etc., I think that's also very true, and it does reflect into this question about targeting. So again, I'm not really offering any answer to your question on Gaza. On the West Bank, I think poverty base is probably still relevant. Categorical and vulnerability targeting also very relevant, and I'm glad social protection, the Minister of Social Development has been able to pay those allowances. A couple of months ago, I think it was to elder people with disabilities, because I think it for all the reasons we mentioned before as well, gives it really has an impact and gives visibility, to the work that is being done. The West Bank is easier to access, not everywhere. Of course, there are issues. It's possible to collect and verify information a bit more. And we have not seen, fortunately yet, hopefully we'll never see massive displacement, right, happening in the West Bank. So that will allow definitely to work through those categories. We might want to look at what categories of vulnerability and categorical targeting we want to use. Again, we have been using some of those before. Some of those are shifting by nature. And then one example is, there has been, for example, a lot of focus in the past from humanitarian side on the area C of the West Bank, like of the Oslo division. Does that even make sense in the current context, right? Probably doesn't, as many argue. So there's going to be a necessity for that, but the importance is extremely high when it comes to categorical vulnerability targeting. Again, easy in the West Bank, extremely hard in Gaza, but it's definitely an area we'll need to focus on in the future. We had a lot of examples even before of the usefulness of PMTS, but also of the shortcomings, right, of those formulas. So more kind of a hybrid approach, and then leaning towards one or the others based on the context is the way to go in the future. How to do that? Happy to hear any idea from the discussion later. I think I'm a bit over time, so I'll hand over back to you.
Yes, thank you very much. And I really, so many ideas that you mentioned resonate so much with me, and I echo the point that you mentioned regarding households and individuals being taken as units of observations, because indeed households aren't homogeneous, aren't cohesive, and there are so many vulnerabilities and intersecting vulnerabilities in one household. So when we look at the household as the unit, we are being oblivious to so many needs and vulnerabilities that require our particular attention. We can discuss more because, yeah, we haven't gotten enough of this discussion, indeed, speaking about the poverty targeting, but also the alternatives that you mentioned. But before we delve more deeply into that, let me pass it to our third panelist. Our third panelists, let me reintroduce them again as well, is Mr. Cosma Gabaglio, who's the Social Policy Officer at UNICEF Palestine. Cosma, now what I want to ask you about is basically the building blocks, or to be more accurate, the low-hanging fruits, the social allowances. How can we expand them? And do they indeed constitute an opportunity to shift towards the rights-based model and to strengthen the linkages between humanitarian assistance and social protection, or between social protection and the HDP nexus more generally? Very interested to hear more from you about that. Over.
Good afternoon, Farah. Thank you very much for the interesting and challenging question, and thank you also for moderating this panel discussion in this really troubled and troubling times, I would say. Let me also express sympathy for the people in Lebanon and Palestine who might some be connected right now and with us, affected by the further escalations on the last few days. Also, many thanks to the ILO, to socialprotection.org, and to ISSA for organizing this webinar, but also, of course, good afternoon and good morning to everyone online listening to us. Maybe To respond to your question, I will take a bit of a detour and start by reiterating some of the background that was already presented in detail by Momin. Maybe the core point is that the work with the Palestinian authorities on strengthening the national social protection system has really been ongoing for many years. It's not something, of course, that that materialized in the current situation. Also, the conversation on introducing social allowances as a mean to move towards a more inclusive type and vision of social protection definitely predates the dramatic escalation that started in October 2023. With the Ministry of Social Development, UNICEF has worked on shock responsive social protection, on local governance and coordination, but also on inclusiveness and on the policy and design dimensions that were already discussed in depth by Momin. And the result of this long-term process was indeed the draft of the Ministry of Social Development strategy last year, just before the escalation of October 2023. Now, fast forward 1 year, and we are in what might seem really like a different universe. The depth of the humanitarian crisis and catastrophe in Gaza bears no comparison, but also in the West Bank, the impact of the economic and movement restriction and of localized escalation has been extremely severe. In Gaza, our experience is that it was very clear from the beginning that the national authorities alone would have not been in a position to swiftly respond to all the huge humanitarian needs. And for this reason, and backed also by assessments of the resilience of markets, both informal and formal, UNICEF has been supporting the population through humanitarian cash transfers from the very beginning of the escalation. This has been done in close coordination with the national authorities, but also, of course, with all the members of the cash working group. Maybe just as a summary of what has been our work in Gaza, before moving really to respond to your question on how does this link to a vision for system building and strengthening of national social protection system, I wanted just to summarize some numbers. So to date, UNICEF has provided cash assistance in Gaza to about 830,000 people, or 140,000 families, 450,000 children, and the majority of this group has been assisted at least twice. Beyond humanitarian cash transfers, or slash, if you want, social protection in an emergency context, UNICEF has also been providing incentive payments for frontline volunteers on a range of different essential services, from solid waste management, education in temporary learning spaces, immunization teams, vaccine mobilizers, and social workers. To go back really straight to your question. So for us, the need to link our response to the longer term work that had been done on national social protection systems, including the work on social allowances, has been always very clear, but this for two main reasons. So one is really the imperative to try to make sure that any humanitarian response builds on what is already there and doesn't undermine it in any way, but also really out of necessity. So without the close collaboration with the Ministry of Social Development and the access to the National Social Registry, it would have been really impossible for us to scale up assistance so quickly. I want to mention maybe two more points that I believe are relevant for this conversation. So the first one relates to the conversation on targeting and proximity-tested, poverty-targeted approach. So our experience in Gaza has been, of course, given the universality of needs, the approach has really been blanket targeting. However, it has also a categorical component in the sense that based on the evaluation of specific needs of specific categories, we have introduced top-up payments. The first one is for families that have pregnant or breastfeeding women. And this is a top-up aimed really at this at covering this specific time of development for children with additional nutritional needs, both for the mother but also for the child. And the second one are top-up payments for households with children with disability. Again, as it has been discussed, the current situation doesn't really allow a targeting at the individual level or payments at the individual level. We have to do with what we have, which are data that sometimes are pre-crisis, sometimes luckily we have received through multiple partners on the ground, and the payments are still targeted towards the standard definition of the household. The second point I wanted to make is that UNICEF, since about April, has completely shifted from over-the-counter delivery of cash assistance to e-wallets and digital payments. This has been done because of the huge issues of hard cash liquidity in Gaza, so the difficulties for people in finding and accessing cash. And it has been done a bit as an experiment, if you want, really with the goal of being able to reach people even in this time. The experience has been vastly positive with some limitations that still need to be overcome. For instance, at the level of the acceptance of this type of payments in the market, which is still not so widespread as we would have wished for. But overall, people are using this type of payments, are able to activate their e-wallets. We, of course, decided to leave the option of cashing out a percentage of the full amount of the assistance. And this has really been informative, and also we believe informative for the conversation at the national level on whether the national cash transfer program could also allow for this option of digital payments through e-wallets in the name of the beneficiaries. Finally, I would just maybe go back to the overall situation and the discussion on where are we looking towards. I believe there is unfortunately still no light at the end of the tunnel, or at least it cannot be seen at the moment. And until the violence and displacement really subside, I believe there will be no real next phase, no real early recovery. In this setting, the implementation of emergency multipurpose cash assistance will most likely remain the tool at hand. However, I also believe it is definitely not too early to start thinking and discussing about what type of support will be needed in a recovery phase in a way that it's either run at least partially through the national systems or linked and closely coordinated with it. Most likely the needs in Gaza will remain humanitarian in nature and universal or semi-universal for a protracted period. In this sense, a categorical approach with differentiated target transfer values, or maybe an approach with additional top-up transfers for different types of needs could be the most fitting option. But this is, of course, open for discussion and conversation. And really maybe related to what Luca was mentioning, the question at the moment is also how to maximize the financial envelope that will be there to cover these almost unlimited needs. I would also say there is definitely not too early to start to rekindle the conversation on the national vision for social protection, building on all the work that was done before the escalation in Gaza, and that Momin presented in detail, including the work on the social allowances. This needs to be done in a way that, if you want, figures out how to combine a national vision that includes two very different contexts, such as Gaza and the West Bank. But I believe indeed this is the time to start doing that, and that spaces like this webinar are also a place where this conversation can be moved forward. Over on my end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cosma. Thank you. This was very enlightening. Thank you very much. I think we are a bit over time, and I take responsibility for that. But I encourage the audience to send their questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box. We will answer them. Some we may answer in writing, like we've been doing, and some we can address them directly. Perhaps we can take the next 8 minutes to see if there are any particular questions from the audience. If not, perhaps I'll ask a couple of questions, just soliciting a few clarifications, and maybe then hand it over to Mr. Majid to provide closing remarks and wrap up. I'll just give the audience a couple of seconds. Perhaps I'll start with a question to Mr. Bilal until we get perhaps additional questions from the audience. Can you hear me now? I think I got a note that, can you hear me? If someone can give me a sign.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, so thank you very much. So until we get probably more questions from the audience, I'll ask Mr. Bilal a question. Mr. Bilal, حضرتك معنا?
Can you hear me, Mr. Bilal? If Mr. Bilal, you are with us, let me know. It seems you are not. It seems that he is not with us.
Maybe this same question, maybe I can ask it to Mu'min, and I can already see on the screen. So Mu'min, Bilal mentioned a dilemma in his intervention, which is basically that from a government-financed schemes point of view, this is quite challenging to happen now, and with the tax base being very tight and with the whole tax system facing challenges. But at the same time, if we are to think of investing more in contributory schemes that are self-financed instead of the non-contributory part that is mostly tax-financed, at the same time, the contributory base is also tight because of the lack of trust in the public systems. The trust is weak, and it would require probably a lot to be built back. So my question to you is, and please feel free to answer it in Arabic. I was supposed to ask the question in Arabic. I don't know why I switched to English inadvertently. But my question to you is, this is a dilemma that was put on the table. So can you think of any immediate solutions, short-term, medium-term, long-term solutions for that? But first and foremost, how can we re-establish the trust in the public systems? Because I think when it comes to tax payments or when it comes to contributory payments, this is in my opinion, the entry point. So over to you if you have an answer to that, please.
Yeah, thanks, Farah, and I'm happy to take this question. Look, I mean, very important points have been mentioned in the social insurance part, and I'm going to focus here on the contributory part. I mean, everybody is aware of the lack of trust, in the government, the inability as well of the government to collect local revenues and international revenues as per, Israeli restrictions, etc. And all of these problems, I think when we look at the negative sides, I think they offer an opportunity as well for us, the Palestinians, as well as for the Palestinian Authority, in order to bring a viable social insurance system in place that could, generate some pooled financing that could cover comprehensive life cycle risks for the workers and their employers, the workers and their families. Now, if I want to be very direct to the questions you have posed, one of the main issues was the lack of trust. For this purpose, with the social partners, we have actually conducted a very comprehensive national campaign in the Occupied Palestinian Territory before October 7, that we've been to different governorates, including the Gaza Strip, actually, to just sit with citizens, hear what they think about the draft law that was amended, etc., and see how can we collectively together, enhance trust in the funds of the social security scheme. Now, one of the main tangible, let's say, proposals that was on the table, which I think is very beneficial going forward, is the gradual implementation of the social insurances, meaning that we start with a gradual approach and we use that approach to gain the progressive trust of the people in the system as soon as they see that there are some really return for them on the table. And we as well use that approach to incentivize employers to subscribe in the social insurance system, and as well to make it less costly, at least for them in the beginning years of implementation. So at the time, what we had actually proposed is, why don't we start with the low-cost insurances, meaning the maternity, work injury, and employment, and we leave the, let's say, the big cost insurances, including death, disability, and survivors, to be implemented gradually within a space of 5 years' time, which was one of the concerns of the people. I think this would, of course, be a good step for the companies and the workers to see how can they be, subscribed in the system, what immediate benefits they could get, and hence improve their trust in the system, etc. But of course, in the Palestinian situation, every public issue is not only concern of the specific sector. It is a concern of the whole Palestinian Authority set, which is problematic when when you're working a public reform that as well requires the trust of the people. And this is not honestly specific to the case of Palestine, but also widely spread in the region, which I think is very important to acknowledge and to work on. And if we want to link it to the social assistance part, I mean, one of the major challenges that we see in the situation of Palestine as the only remaining country in the Arab region that still has no social security place that is comprehensive adopted. It was maybe the last country with Lebanon, but Lebanon has succeeded to adopt a new reform in social security, which is something that we need. And I think if we adopt and we have this law implemented the soonest, then a lot of the pressure on the social assistance and the non-contributory part would be to some extent release. This is, of course, going to be coupled with, active market labor interventions, but also trying to formalize the economy. Because as you may know, I mean, 50% or even more of the Palestinian workers in the Palestinian economy are actually informal workers, which was also a problematic challenge for the social insurance. So this is basically, just not to take much time, one of my first reactions, but I leave it as well some space for other panelists and speakers. Over, and thank you very much.
Many thanks to you, and thank you for this compelling answer. Indeed, if you are to be simplistic, it's basically start giving services, start giving something, and then basically introduce new taxation, introduce new contributory schemes. But yeah, gradually or slowly but surely, then people would see that there is something being given back. Do we have a room for an additional question from the moderator's side? We actually have a question from Valentina Barca. So I'll ask this question. I'll see whom from the panelists would feel comfortable answering it, and then we'll hand it over to Majid. Majid, so sorry for keeping you. Valentina is asking a question to Cosma. So she's saying that, Cosma, you mentioned the Youth of Government Social Registry data by UNICEF and by others, as she understands. Do you have any further reflections on how that has worked? What is working and what is not, and how the national information system could be improved on that basis in the medium term. Continuous birth, death, disability registration, crucial, but not the problems associated with that. So if you can please, Cosma, answer this, and I'm going to add one additional question, follow-up question to Luca, which is related to that, because Luca, you spoke about this kind of, I'm going to call it transition from the poverty targeting system to the categorical and vulnerability targeting system. And Valentina, Miss Valentina, she mentioned the social registries, and this was the question that I had in mind. So what is the role of social registries here? We know that social registries are usually used to reuse proxy means testing and to basically avoid duplication, but they're still error prone, you know? So it's another way of saying proxy means testing, basically. But do they have a role to play in this transition? And is this role positive or negative? I know this, the question is a bit technical. Maybe you don't have an answer, but as we are trying to narrow down things and get into the tangible parts, if you can provide reflections. Over to you, Cosma and Luca.
Thank you, Farah, and thank you, Valentina, for the very good question. To be honest, really, the social registry is at the center for us of the priorities in terms of supporting the Ministry of Social Development in reestablishing its capacity, both at the level of data collection on the ground, but also at the level of management of information and coordination of responses based on this information. Now, to see the social registry simply as a tool, as a mean to implement a PMT, that would be a limited way to see that. If you want to start from the opposite, I mean, a country without an updated and inclusive registry of its population and their needs, well, there is nothing to build any type of policy on. So for us, it's really the first starting point. A social registry that through time must become as dynamic as possible, including multiple sources of information, and it sits within the Ministry of Social Development, but it's also a national-wide tool, if you want, that it's used extensively. This is a line of work we believe it will be key to start rekindling soon in collaboration with key stakeholders, including other UN agencies and the World Bank. Of course, the conversation on this in Gaza depends on the stabilization of the situation of the ground. Just to mention, we are working with the Ministry of Social Development to, as soon as the situation allows, pilot some direct data collection that initially will not be strictly aimed at updating the social registry in Gaza, but really wants to be a pilot that can also provide information on how to do so in the near future. Over.
Thank you, Cosma. Thank you. Agreed, by the way. Over, Luca.
Thanks, Farah. And so the experience, at least from a humanitarian cash point of view, right? The experience of UNICEF with the social registry has been really amazing and kind of leading the way on that. It's not the case for everybody else. Now, I think on your question on the importance of social registries, extreme, I would say. That would, I mean, we kept saying from the very beginning, if we actually had the National Social Registry in Palestine covering, you know, everyone, that would have saved us so much time and so many efforts, right? In doing so many of these things we had to do separately, because the registry is extremely limited here. There is the issue definitely of especially, you know, 1 year into this crisis of, you know, updates, recertification and everything that Cosma mentioned. So that remains an issue. But when it comes to I think when it comes to the potential use, you know, of categorical and vulnerability targeting, which again for Gaza it's a big question mark per se, then having an actual registry, so having a place where we can actually go and see who's around, have information on those people, even if not, you know, the most updated one, right? But at least have information on people would really be key, right? That would be the entry door, and then we can really work in our case, as humanitarian community, internally on narrowing that down based on whatever criteria we agree are our priorities, like for humanitarian work. But the importance of having that, it's crucial, and that's, I mean, we really, I think we really look forward to the moment we will have a national social register in Palestine that's all encompassing and can really help. What's something important about that is a registry cannot be it's now in this case it's held by MOSD. In other contexts maybe other authorities, but it needs to be integrated within a larger system. I think that's what Cosmo was saying as well. So an information is collected needs to be quickly validated by linking it to the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Interior, international organizations, or whatever. That's key to make sure it's actually usable in real time. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a very important discussion, and maybe later, I mean, as things unfold, we can start thinking about the high cost and how can we reduce it of these registries. We can start thinking about, maybe let's hope someday, sometime, we'll be able to think of just like the National Civil Registry as being our reference point and our basically infrastructure for governance. Yeah. So I think we can just accommodate one additional question. There is a question in the Q&A that has been answered, but since Mr. Bilal is back with us, I'm going to switch to Arabic.
Mr. Bilal, I have just a question regarding cooperation and partnerships. Well, all of the other questions almost have been answered, but just a quick question. What do you expect? What do you need from the perspective of cooperation and partnerships so that you'd be able to get to your objective and so that you could be able to improve your social security system? Just in 1 minute, please. Thank you. Technically, well, it's easy to deal with that, but most importantly in Palestine is the lack of coordination between the government, the representatives of the private sector, the representatives of the employees, the employers, etc. I've focused on the governmental side mainly. I've talked about the issue of trust and the importance of having a legislative system that would take matters into hand when it comes to completing the social security system, and that would be kind of a tutor and a guardian of the implementation of the social security rules. Now, the second issue is related to the institutions of the other stakeholders. For example, when it comes to employees or workers, these workers are represented by trade unions, which democratic representation does not exceed 16% of the totality of workers in Palestine. And this is a major problematic, and it has been shown in the first case when the Social Security law has been adopted. So the different trade unions have approved the law text, and then right after the protests, the relevant protests, they have backed down. And so this is a major issue when it comes to dialogue and governance. And this is an issue that is also related to the private sector institutions that are taking part in the dialogue. These are the institutions that are taking part in the big companies, and they don't represent the small companies or the informal sector companies. And this is one of the major problematics, especially when it comes to implementing the provisions of the law related to labor. So I think that what's at the core is the politics, the policies, rather than the economy. We should have a legislative council representing the Palestinian people at the constitutional and democratic levels. And we should have here the private sector representatives and the workers' representatives to be chosen democratically. So this is at the core of our interests, and this is the starting point, getting to a good social security system. Thank you so much, Mr. Majid. I'm sorry that we have kept you till now. We wanted you to give the final words, and thank you so much in advance. Thank you, Farah. It was a very rich discussion. We have shed light on many aspects related to the situation of social security in Palestine. So first, I would like to thank all the panelists and all the experts that have accompanied us throughout this series of the Compass. And I would like to talk about the importance of putting the social protection systems of Palestine within the Compass. And despite the importance of everything that has been presented, I don't think personally that it would be possible to address the social protection in Palestine with the same approach that we've adopted for other countries after what had happened and after what is currently happening, because it's an unprecedented situation. We've talked about this crisis. We've said that this is an unprecedented crisis after the destruction of all the aspects of life, the healthcare, the infrastructure, the education, the economy, etc. The priorities now are different, and it is important now to think differently from the perspective of the social protection. I think that once the peace is reestablished, the efforts should be deployed on some of the points that I would like to give as a brainstorming. First, we should focus on reestablishing the sanitation, drinkable water, rehabilitating the main infrastructure as well as the education institutions, also giving an absolute priority for the health care and for the psychological support for children, because these are the most vulnerable and the most impacted by the current events. And this is a milestone for reestablishing the Palestinian society after the war, and also resisting to poverty, so not being limited to the cash transfers, but also preparing people to be self-sufficient and to go out of the dire poverty. If everything goes this way, and of course these priorities are listed within the social protection background and within the initiative in this regard, so then we could talk about an integrated, transparent, sustainable, inclusive social protection system. So I just wanted to give you these final words. And before giving the floor back to Farah, I would like to thank all of the speakers and all of the panelists for the valuable input. And hopefully the series of the Compass would continue in the future with success. Thank you, Farah. Thank you. I have nothing to say. After you, I just want to thank the ILO and all those who organized this event. Thank you all, and thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, Mr. Majid. Thank you.